there, I'm Officer Cameron Coronado with the City of Portage Police Department. I am badge number 4, and I am currently a night shift officer for our department.
That is Wisconsin Police Officer Cameron Coronado. But now, instead of protecting the community, he is accused of a crime so disturbing it's almost unthinkable. Prosecutors say he shoved a pacifier down his 6-month-old son's throat with such force it caused bleeding on the infant's brain. How could this happen? We're going to break down the chilling details laid out in a criminal complaint and the potential warning signs that investigators say may have been there before. And we are going to get expert insight on what this case reveals from a retired police commander. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. This is an incredibly disturbing case out of Portage, Wisconsin that we're going to be bringing to you. A 32-year-old police officer, Cameron Coronado, is accused of essentially the unthinkable. Prosecutors say he forced a pacifier down his 6-month-old son's throat with such force that it lacerated the back of the infant's throat and caused a brain bleed. He's now charged with felony child abuse and related offenses. And even more chilling, his wife, who's cited in the criminal complaint, apparently told investigators this wasn't the first troubling incident. Now, we're going to get to what that could mean for the case, but first we got to go through this step by step through what investigators say happened, again, according to the complaint. So, according to this criminal complaint that was reviewed by local affiliates WISC, WMTV, and WKBT, this incident happened in the early morning hours of August 16th at around 3 a.m. inside of Coronado's home. Now, his wife apparently told investigators that their baby had become fussy. So Coronado took the child into the kitchen. Moments later, she claimed she heard him snap, followed by an outburst where he reportedly said these words, "Oh my God, shut the bleep up." Right after that, she says she noticed the baby's cry suddenly change. And when she rushed into the kitchen, she said she saw Coronado wiping blood from the infant's mouth. And when she demanded to know what happened, she told police that Coronado admitted he had shoved the pacifier into the baby's throat and that the child was bleeding and he couldn't get it to stop. Now, shockingly, despite what the baby had allegedly endured, his wife told police that this 6-month-old actually was able to calm down for a few minutes, fall asleep. That didn't last long because he soon woke up crying in pain, struggled to swallow, refusing to eat. Again, this is the narrative. It was at this point that his mother claims she insisted they take him to the hospital. However, Coronado's wife told investigators that he initially resisted taking the baby to the hospital, reportedly saying he knew what was going to happen if they sought medical help. So despite his alleged opposition, she didn't listen. She ultimately took their child in for treatment. And according to the criminal complaint, doctors found a cut at the back of the baby's throat, layers of skin scraped away by what they described as, quote, something of force, and maybe most alarmingly, a CT scan. There was a CT scan that revealed bleeding on the infant's brain. Medical staff, they even noted that there were other injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. It's a horrible story. There's no other way to really explain it. But it is definitely one that we wanted to bring to you. And the reason we can do that is because of the amazing support that we get from our sponsor, Upside. Now, if you don't know what it is, Upside is great. It is a free app that gets you cash back when you buy daily essentials. So if I pump my gas, I can use Upside. I go out to lunch, I can use Upside. I go to a convenience store, I can use Upside. And why not get cash back when I do all these things, right? This is real, actual cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you transfer right into your bank account. So once you have the free Upside app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card, but you follow the steps on the app, you get paid. So to find out how much you can earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen. But make sure to use our promo code SIDEBAR because you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Now, court records indicate that an arrest warrant was issued for Coronado on August 18th. He was booked into the Sauk County Jail, charged with felony child abuse. That's for intentionally causing harm to a child, along with disorderly conduct, which had a domestic abuse modifier attached to it. So let me actually go into a little bit of the legal analysis here about what those charges mean as they pertain to Wisconsin state law. So child abuse, intentionally causing bodily harm, comes from a specific Wisconsin statute. It is a Class H felony, and for prosecutors to prove that charge, it seems they need to prove three things. One, that the victim was a child under 18. Two, that the defendant caused bodily harm, which in Wisconsin is defined as physical pain or injury, illness, or any impairment of physical condition. And three, that he did this purposely. Punishment for a Class H felony? When we looked it up to 6 years in prison and a fine of up to $10,000. Disorderly conduct with a domestic abuse modifier, that comes from another specific Wisconsin statute. It is a Class B misdemeanor, and proving that charge means the state has to show Coronado engaged in this case, violent conduct that caused a disturbance. It's punishable by up to 90 days in jail and a $1,000 fine. Now, as disturbing as all of this is, according to the criminal complaint, this wasn't even the first troubling incident. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, to help me break all this down, I want to bring on a special guest. I want to bring on retired police commander and host of Profiling Evil, author of Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, Mike King. Mike, I mean, your title to your book, if these allegations are true, how fitting is it? In your experience, have you ever seen a law enforcement officer be accused of crimes against their own children?
Jesse, I can't think of a case that I know of that mirrors this, although it makes perfect sense that it would have happened in the profession somewhere. I mean, sadly, parents reach a tipping point at times. This is a little concerning though, because I wonder about the repetitive kinds of events that we're hearing about.
Well, if you're investigating a member of law enforcement, how does that complicate the investigation?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that number one, I was the most concerned about when I read this, and there's pretty limited information out there, although you laid this thing out beautifully. Number one is when we see the actual evidence of what the degree of injury was to the child, and I am in no way minimizing this. I read one report that said 1 layer of skin. I don't know what that means, Jesse, but in the back of the throat, I can't imagine that there's a whole lot of layers of skin, and enough that they couldn't stop the bleeding initially. So I don't know if law enforcement collected the wipes that were in the house when they went and hopefully served a search warrant to get an indication of how much blood the baby lost, how significant that was. The idea that he shoved the pacifier down the throat of the child is really troubling. And you can kind of see this frustration building with the comments that were apparently made and then this physical act. But you know, the thing that's really troubling me the most is that reported brain bleed. And how on earth shoving a pacifier down the throat would cause a brain bleed?
Yeah.
And I'm having kind of flashbacks, Jesse, to a homicide case that I investigated where I got a confession out of the father. I heard the testimony of squeezing another child, and I can envision this interview that I recorded where the father told me about squeezing the child, and he's making this motion, which is just so troubling and so frustrating. Then this violent movement back and forth. And I'm wondering if that's actually what's caused the brain bleed is something called contra coup.
I've heard of that before too, unfortunately, in a lot of child abuse cases. By the way, the wife's account, right? The mother in this case. You know, it gets complicated from a legal point of view when you talk about spousal privilege and whether or not she can testify against her spouse, but it seems like a lot of this is based on her account. What do you make of that, and how important is her role in proving what happened here?
Well, I think the idea of domestic violence in the home is really terrifying because there's an emotional thing that the victims of spousal abuse, if there was any, or at least witnessing it with their children, there's this wacky kind of an environment that these families get in where they keep hoping things will get better. And she's laying out that there is some past behaviors that were predictive of this thing happening. And that's troubling that something wasn't done sooner, knowing that this individual, if all of this is true, is starting to get more and more on edge and more volatile, especially making verbal kinds of threats and then eventually acting it out. I think there's going to need to be a serious discussion about how much the mother knew, whether she felt the confidence to step forward, whether she was being traumatized in any way, or she thought it would just get better. But I'm also wondering about the police department, Jesse.
Well, let me talk about that.
Were they seeing things?
Let me talk about that because, first of all, you know, people might say a conflict of interest. It's being reported that a special prosecutor was appointed to the case. The Portage Police Chief, Keith Klafke, said it was the Sauk County Sheriff's Office that's handling the investigation, which would be appropriate, right? Because you can't have this police officer's own department investigating him. I mean, maybe you could in a certain circumstances, but for this one, they're trying to avoid any appearance of a conflict of interest or anything like that.
Yeah, I think they're doing it right, and that's the protocol. A local police department would usually look toward the county sheriff. If they felt like there was a conflict, it then might go up to a district attorney's office investigator to look at, or ultimately the attorney general, and of course moving it up from there. So I think they're doing the right thing, and it just takes away the optics of any kind of home cooking in what decisions might be made.
You mentioned red flags. So is there an investigation into his colleagues, the people that knew him, the people who worked him? Have you ever seen anything like this? Was he at the breaking point? Have you observed maybe in cases that he worked on where he got violent? How expansive can that investigation be to try to see if there were any kind of warning signs? Again, assuming he did this.
Yeah, hopefully the investigators that are handling this case will look and see and petition personnel records to see if there were use of force issues coming up or concerns that the police department had that this officer was reaching a boiling point or over boiling. And those are always concerns because police officers are put in these really tough situations every single day, and there needs to be better mechanisms in place to evaluate. And that usually falls on like the local supervisor, the patrol shift sergeant, or whoever they report to say, hey, I think we're having a problem developing here. Some agencies have actually gone to the point that they've put in some safety measures where they say, hey, if there are 2 use of force incidents in a certain amount of time, we're going to get this person in for psychological counseling or something like that. And again, gosh, at 3 o'clock in the morning, it wasn't that this guy's working graveyards and this is happening in the middle of the day. I guess we've all been parents with fussy kids, so it's just troubling.
Now, as I mentioned before, this criminal complaint outlines something else. It outlines other troubling alleged incidents that Coronado's wife reported to police, and they are deeply disturbing. So according to the complaint, she apparently told detectives that Coronado had a, quote, low frustration tolerance with children. She said he once squeezed his daughter too hard and even punched a hole in a wall. But maybe the most chilling detail comes from an incident that she described on July 19th. Coronado allegedly became so enraged because the children wouldn't settle down for bedtime, and she recalled a terrifying threat that he supposedly made, saying, "I'll kill these bleeping kids if their baby didn't stop crying." Mike, what do you make of that? I mean, how does that alleged threat here, "I'll kill these kids"? I mean, I don't know how you prove that other than, I don't know, talking to the wife, maybe the children, I don't know. How does that impact investigators and how they approach this case?
Yeah, this is so troubling because it is kind of a precipitating stressor or an event that really makes you worry about not only going through that discussion and fantasy phase, but then finally acting it out or saying it enough times that acting it out makes sense to somebody. I suspect that if he's made those comments at home, he probably has made them to other police officers or other people, and that may all come back to really play into this case to show that this wasn't just an accidental momentary snap where something went wrong. Again, it's so hard. They're going to need to really figure out the stressors that were going on in the relationship, in the family, in his job, but none of it justifies abuse.
And another aspect in this case that makes it even more jarring is that Coronado had been publicly profiled just months earlier in an officer showcase video that was posted to the Portage Police Facebook page. And in it, he introduced himself to the community. He talked about his role as a training officer. He even shared his background in criminal justice and emergency medical services.
Hey there, I'm Officer Cameron Coronado with the City of Portage Police Department. I am badge number 4, and I am currently a night shift officer for our department, so you probably don't see me very often. I've been with the department for approximately 3 years, and I'm currently one of the training officers for the city as well. Prior to my career in law enforcement, I did attend UW Sauk County, where I received an associate's degree, just in general education. I then attended UW Whitewater, where I received a bachelor's degree in sociology with an emphasis in criminal justice. I've also attended a police academy through Western Technical College up in Sparta, Wisconsin, and I am also a licensed EMT in the state of Wisconsin and have been for approximately 4 years. Coming to the city, I'm not actually from here. I'm actually up from Juneau County. I came down here because my wife was actually working in the city already as a social worker, but over time, I've generally grown to enjoy the community more and more. Everyone's been very inviting, and I've gained a lot of experience here in the city. So thank you so much for your time, and stay safe out there.
You know, Mike, look, these are allegations, right? He's innocent until proven guilty. But from your perspective, how does it affect the community when you have an officer who's been publicly showcased and now is not accused of a speeding ticket? He's accused of a serious crime of child abuse. How does this affect the community?
Well, I think the communities already across the nation are concerned about law enforcement, and there's been kind of a rising tide in the last 10 years of really allegations. You know, it really goes back to also looking at the employment process and what kind of testing is going on in the employment process. Is there mental health evaluations going on during the process, and what stressors are happening on the job? It is a really challenging problem for the good cops when somebody does something like this, because 99% of them, and some people may argue that number, I would say 99.9% of police officers are doing the job and doing it right. But boy, when cases like this happen, or other cases that we've heard about recently in the news where law enforcement ethics have really come into question, it really becomes challenging for the entire profession and the public, who needs to trust that the person showing up is filled with integrity and goodwill.
Should there be an internal investigation? Is it conducted by internal affairs? Do they go everything through his hiring process, his record? I mean, you know, we say this many times in cases involving educators, teachers who are accused of abusing children. How were they hired? Why were they hired? Hindsight's 20/20. Maybe it's impossible to know or predict how people might behave. Things can change, but the question becomes, should that be examined? Should there be an internal review?
You know, in many departments that will happen naturally, because the department wants to know, how can I prevent this in the future? Some departments may choose not to, stick their head in the sand and hope that the problem eventually goes away. The investigation hopefully will look into some of those things. But to me, Jesse, the problem is much broader than that. It's the fact that we're seeing a downturn in law enforcement numbers across the country. I think in part it's because of the scrutiny that's fallen on law enforcement and the lack of backing by their administrations, which has nothing to do with this particular case, other than I'm on a pulpit for a second here, and that is to say that law enforcement standards are tragically dropping across the country because police departments are having a harder time bringing people that are credible into the job. And that is really terrifying to me, because if this is happening with what should have been 10 years ago the cream of the crop, then what's going to happen if we continue to lower standards?
That's a legitimate concern. I totally get it. Do you see any avenue where he would remain in some form in law enforcement? I mean, if he's convicted of this or he pleads guilty to this, I don't really see an avenue where that happens. But if the charges are dropped for some reason or he's found not guilty, in your experience, officers who are charged with a crime and the charges are dropped or they're acquitted, can they come back to the force?
Yeah, I mean, we see police officers who are charged and acquitted come back to the job. And frankly, they should be able to come back to the job. But this is kind of an interesting situation, because if in fact he has suggested that it happened or said, I know what's going to happen if we go to the hospital, if any of those things are found credible, it's likely that he's going to be convicted. And that is probably going to solve the problem, because he shouldn't be in law enforcement if he's convicted of a felony charge. Some agencies may suggest that some misdemeanors are acceptable. I don't know of any personally that do that. Infractions, entirely different kinds of issues.
You know what complicates his defense in a case like this? When you're dealing with young children, you could say, I've seen defense attorneys say this, oh, those injuries on the child, they were running on the playground, they fell down, they have bumps and injuries, you know, they have bumps and bruises. Not a 6-month-old. Very, very different. That is such a vulnerable state. To explain away those injuries as a result of something else, someone else, that could be problematic for him, right?
Oh, absolutely. And in reality, hopefully they're doing a closer examination of the child, because if there's any suggestion that the sister to this child was squeezed, it's possible that this child was squeezed as well, and there would be rib fractures or at least disjointed rib where the cartilage is torn. That contre-coup is only created by violent shaking, where that brain actually is rocking back and forth inside the skull of that child. And so if that injury was caused by contre-coup, that's an entirely different kind of an assault than simply pushing something down. I'm really struggling with how pushing a pacifier down the throat would cause any kind of lesions in the brain, unless it was so violent pushing it in that it caused that little contre-coup reaction where the brain tore away from the lining.
It's disgusting to be thinking about. It's horrifying to be thinking about. And, this apparent evidence of bleeding is also just kind of hard to imagine.
Well, and I might say, Jesse, this too is just the beginning, because if there were brain bleeds, we don't know if that's been trauma to the child that will end up in any kind of a long-term issue that child deals with too. So this is only the beginning. This is a 6-month-old child that they really can't look at and understand cognitive response or physical responses.
Now, according to court records, Coronado made his first court appearance on August 20th by video from the Sauk County Jail. As we mentioned, a special prosecutor was appointed. The judge set his bond at $10,000 along with strict conditions. Maybe no surprise here that he's to have no contact with his wife or children except through a third party who can retrieve his belongings from the family's home. He is due back in court on September 3rd for a preliminary hearing, basically to determine if there's enough evidence to move forward with the prosecution. And he's currently on suspension from the Portage Police Department pending the outcome of this case. Now, real quick, Mike, the ramifications of him being suspended, could that jeopardize any cases, any investigations he was a part of that are now moving forward towards prosecution?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, wouldn't you love to be the prosecutor on all those cases that you now have to just either dismiss or try to continue while this thing is ferreted out? It is undoubtedly going to have an impact on other cases. And frankly, depending on what happens, could impact future cases where he's brought in to testify, especially if it's a domestic violence or a child abuse case.
It's a good point. Mike King, thank you so much for coming on. It was great seeing you.
Good to see you, Jesse. Thank you.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.